Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. And I'm joined by my beautiful co-host,
Ben Wilson. I build MLOps tooling at Databricks.
And today we have an awesome guest. His name is Amir Ziai. He has 3 master's degrees, which we're going to get into. They include systems engineering, data science, and computer science. And throughout his professional career, he's been an applied ML engineer in the fitness industry at Hart Incorporated, H-A-R-T, in the brand sort of marketing industry at Zephyr, and most recently in the streaming industry at Netflix.
Hey folks, this is Charles Maxwood. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people that want to update their resume and find a better job. And I figure, well, why not just share my resume? So if you go to topenddevs.com/resume, enter your name and email address, then you'll get a copy of the resume that I use, that I've used through freelancing, through most of my career, as I've kind of refined it and tweaked it to get me the jobs that I want. Like I said, topenddevs.com/resume will get you that. And you can just kind of use the formatting. It comes in Word and Pages formats, and you can just fill it in from there.
So, Amir, you build large-scale systems for multimodal content understanding. I can't even pronounce that.
That's a mouthful.
What that means? Yeah. So what does that mean?
That's a mouthful, yes. Well, thanks for having me. That's been what I've been doing for the past few years at Netflix. So I work with a team that basically everything that comes after we have either licensed a title or a show, or we have through our studio made the content. There's a series of steps that people need to go through. So this includes things like creating subtitles, creating dubs, creating promotional assets, things like trailers and posters and artwork, all of that stuff. So there's a whole village of people that are basically going through the steps required for launching the title. And my work has been more or less in the past 3+ years to build assistive tooling for them that they can really make their life a little bit more efficient. So they have to really understand what the content is about, and they have to process lots and lots of shows on a monthly basis. So the tooling we build helps them understand the content. So that's where the content understanding part comes in. And we have a massive catalog. So we need to process all this information, index everything for them, make them really accessible. And I guess that's hopefully explains what the large scale and content understanding pieces mean.
Nice. Yeah. So I used to work at Tubi as a data scientist. Tubi is Fox's streaming service. And we actually had a few episodes ago an ex-Netflix current Tubi employee. And it was really interesting to think about the differences in sort of how scale impacts your tech stack, the types of problems you work on. And after you reach a certain threshold, doing all these trailers and content understanding types of things manually just isn't tenable. So it's really cool to see how these companies pivot and hire ML engineers to do that and automate that. So Ben, I know you were going to say something.
Yeah, it's just an interesting place to come into from a data scientist, ML engineer, software engineer, is to go into a company, into a problem space where you're never starved for great ideas and things to build as a product that somebody's going to use almost instantly.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because since I've started this, and I've been at Netflix for 5 years now, and I've been in this role for 3.5, day and night difference in terms of how excited people are to work with ML technologies, people who are doing the day-to-day work, the creators, the trailer editors, the artwork artists. They really like ML stuff, and they really are helping us and working with us in very close proximity. We are like having sessions with them. It's that level of excitement I generally haven't seen in my career before, working with people who really are excited and not worried about all this new technology. It's very interesting. That just gives me a lot of like drive to do the work. And there's, as you said, it's like media assets, video files, images, like text. There's all this. It's really a data scientist dream to work with all these different pieces of things, and there's real business impact to be had. So it's an interesting space because I guess kind of out of the box, you get all of those boxes checked. So it's just doing the work, and with the level of excitement of the people you're working with, it just makes it much easier to work.
I've got a potentially controversial question for you.
Go for it.
Related to what you just said and your history before coming into Netflix, working as sort of a traditional data scientist, right? Where we would be tasked by businesses to, hey, can you solve this problem? We have data in a database somewhere that's collected either through pristine means or less than pristine means, and data quality issues related to, tabular data formats. Did you find the transition from the chaotic, unstructured, even though semi-structured data that exists in data warehouses to solve problems into the pristine environment of dealing with standards-based data? Did you, for like audio, video, these are all, the data is either correct or it doesn't work, right? Did you find that transition, does it make it easier to build viable products? And do you enjoy what you do more because you sort of have guardrails and controls over the data that you're interfacing with?
Yeah, that was actually my intuition as well, that I'm going to go in. I did not really know much about media files and media processing, all of that stuff. So I went in thinking that, hey, like these are MP4 files, WAV files, like JPEGs, where they must know where exactly everything is. You must have a very clean system of like keeping track of everything because, hey, we're showing it to members and it's all working pretty well. Turns out there is a world of like many, many steps of before we get there, especially the earlier in the process, the more chaotic the whole system can be. So it's not, at the end of the day, it's not very dissimilar to what you're describing with tabular data warehouses. It's just a different file format. The set of challenges tend to be different. So now you have like many, many deliveries of the file. And let's say you're looking at a movie. So let's say it's a 2-hour movie. There could be many, many deliveries of it. There could be many, many cuts of it. So systems that keep track of like the life cycle, that is where the challenges come in. There's different levels of QC. So long way of saying that it's not as clean as one might think. And there's maybe not exactly the same challenges, but there's a similar set of challenges that you have to deal with.
Yeah, that was something that in my career journey, when I went from, pure engineering, like, traditional engineering into, data science and ML and stuff. But one of my final jobs before making that transition was working for a disc manufacturer that basically we were subcontractors for Warner, like Warner Brothers Studio. And we were doing all of their DVD and Blu-ray manufacturing for them. But every couple of months, they would have us come out to like the mastering studios in Hollywood and sometimes on the lot. And you get to like meet all these famous people. But what I was always interested in the most in was, and asked super annoying questions to the people that were there doing this work. It's like, how do you get that file? And I thought that it was just, okay, somebody has a file that they put somewhere that's the movie. And then you master that into a Blu-ray and they're like, let's show you the process. I've never seen data lineage associated that's like that firsthand since that. And I've been working now in tech for like over a decade. I'm sure Netflix is even more complex than what I saw at Warner, but it was insane how many steps there were. Everything from the menus, like all of that Java code that generates the interactive menus when you load a disk into a machine. And then all of the hidden extra features. Those are all just hundreds of files that they have to compile together. And then I didn't realize that audio, when they get it, is raw. It's not compressed at all. So it's like these lossless formats where the audio is actually 100 times bigger than the video file. And they were doing it manually though. And so you think about a studio with the releases that they come out with and seeing how many people were involved. It's like, wow, there's 15 people on this floor just doing subtitles. That's crazy. And they're all working on the same movie right now. Everybody's doing like a different 5-minute slice. But for what you're doing, your group has to scale through in such a way that most people wouldn't even be able to comprehend. So what is the process when you're looking at the tooling that would potentially be needed for something that people are still doing manually? How do you and your team break down that problem and say, this is kind of how we would tackle this, or here's some theories? I'm really curious about that process and how you think through that.
Yeah, it's I guess it's generally doesn't tend to be very systematic. We are getting a little bit more systematic about it. Usually it's the case is that a lot of these ideas come out organically as a part of working with these creatives. So we just watch them work, or they complain about something a lot, and we get ideas. Oh, you're doing these 5 things and then you're delivering the file. Why do you need to do that? Can we apply something to this step? And I guess the first maybe couple of years of me being in this role, there was a lot of that going on. It was just, I noticed something, maybe that there's something there. Let's go see if we can deliver some value with an algorithm, with it. Maybe even in a lot of cases, honestly, some simple application or some simple, not even machine learning related. So that's the other interesting thing that I guess I've learned a lot in this role is you don't need to be fancy all the time. You can just make a lot of really good impact with the simplest solution possible. So there's been a lot of those low hanging fruits, and there still are. But I guess over time, as we have delivered some of those, made things a little bit more systematic, built platforms, now we're getting to a point where we can kind of look across the board and see what are really the big opportunities, what are things that we can really build that have longer term impact. Maybe things that the creators are maybe not even thinking about right now. Maybe things that they could be doing completely differently. And I guess I'm happy that we're in that state now, because it's now a portfolio of really low hanging fruit that we can immediately deliver value and feel good about. And also things that are longer term bets we're really excited about, but we pitch these to the creatives and are like, why would we do things this way? Does it really make sense? And then you have to go through it with them, see if it really does make sense. What would it mean if we delivered something like that they can maybe change their workflows? And that's one of the other things I really learned is changing workflows is really hard. But if you get people excited about a new piece of technology, and they can see that it's going to save them time, and they don't have to do the grunt work, and they can focus on the creative aspects of the work, they really become champions of the project. So that's been, I guess, I'm really liking our kind of cadence now of a mix of both very short-term and long-term projects.
That's a really interesting observation with regards to something that I've only seen in a couple of companies that I've interacted with, where it seems like it's an uphill battle, and you're building ML backed, or just as you said, it doesn't have to be fancy. Could be scripts, or could be just simple SQL that automates some annoying part of somebody's job. And when you start tackling all of those things, and having lived through that myself at a number of companies, when you get to a point where your initial landscape of low-hanging fruit, you list it all out. Here's all the things that suck about what we're doing right now. And here's how we're going to tackle all this over the next 2 or 3 years. We have this big plan. And when you're 6 months away from hitting that point where you're kind of done with everything, it's almost like this demoralizing feeling that some people in the team get. They're like, what happens when we're done with all this? Are we done? Done? Are they just going to dissolve our team or our department? And they just kind of, people that have been there, done that, are just like, no, don't worry. The fact that these tools now exist there's going to be a whole new generation of low-hanging fruit that comes out, and you're going to enable creative use of the things that you built and how these things can interact with one another. is going to, when you free up the people that are doing the job and let their creativity shine, they're going to be your unofficial, product managers. They're going to come up with these ideas of, hey, there's this amazing thing that we want to do. Did you find that surprising, like that behavior that happens?
Yeah, especially in contrast to like other types of industries or roles that I've been in. As I said, I guess earlier, it's like this level of excitement of people wanting you to build them stuff that like may seemingly look like it's like replacing parts of their job. So I've always been worried that I've been in industries where I'm building tooling for people and they're not necessarily excited about those innovations. So I guess like the first reaction of many people is like, hey, like where's this going? Like where's this? What's the logical extension of you building all this stuff? And I'm not really sensing that at all. And I think it's comes out of people really understanding that it's the more you free them up to do the creative stuff, they can just do more and more. And there's always going to be more. I guess like what you said with like, are we going to be done? I think it's just, you're never going to be done. It like a business area may not make a lot of sense to invest in or as much in at some point, but there's always going to be things that we need to build and improve. And I guess that's the really exciting part. And it's really, I guess, fortunate that in my position, like the people I'm working with kind of have that mindset, and you can work closely together to kind of drive things forward. And as you said, they become your product managers. They tell you, hey, like here's a feature, like how about we add this? And it's honestly, it's kind of the other end of the spectrum. Sometimes I get overwhelmed, or if the team gets overwhelmed, like there's probably, I don't know, in our like small team, there's like 6 of us, like we can't possibly be building all these things this quarter. But that's a good problem to have, at least in my estimation. Of you want people to come to you, you want people to really use your stuff, and that's much better than the opposite problem.
There's also an aspect of, I think, team culture. And from everybody that I've ever talked to that either currently works or has worked at the company that you now work for, there's something very special about how they construct teams, who they hire, and how people sort of all collaborate together to build cool stuff. And even if you have the finest, individual contributors in the world, you could hire the best technical software engineer out there. And if nobody likes each other and nobody believes in each other or wants to see each other succeed, even if you have that mountain of backlog of work that now becomes a burden, and you just kind of feel overwhelmed, like, this sucks, I'm going to find a new job. But everybody I've talked to, it's just like, no, this is awesome. Like, we have all this work. I love the people that I work with. We build awesome stuff together. So what do you think sets apart the culture at Netflix within it, not just at the company as a whole, but within an engineering team? What is it that makes it different than other places that you worked before? And do you think it's something that is in the hands and in the mind of each individual contributor that's part of that team?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess it is self-selecting to an extent. So I haven't worked at another big tech company, but I've been at a variety of different startups. And my experience has been that generally, like, I feel, even though I'm at a relatively big company now, I don't feel like I'm at a big company. I feel like that I'm still at a startup, or I'm just basically trying to figure things out, like come up with ideas, see like what is actually going to stick. I do feel like, and this is very common for a lot of other ICs at Netflix, I do play the product manager role quite a bit. And that's that ownership of a space and like really caring about like where all of this is going. That is an interesting thing. And that's a little bit counterintuitive, because if every IC is in that position, and how do you like coordinate and work together? That's always was my question before joining Netflix. Hey, what do you mean like there's no process? What do you mean like people are going to be able to have like freedom and responsibility, as I guess the culture saying goes? But it kind of works. I can't really explain how. Like there is the game of like, yes, you can come up with ideas, then you have to, because it's so, I guess, not centrally coordinated. You need to convince other people. It's very like bottom up and organic to figure out like what the right team is. Like you can be very nimble and like convince a couple of people to work with you on a project. And if you figure out that dynamic, it's a really satisfying place to be in. And I guess maybe it's just a really good fit for my personality of having all that freedom and being able to push things forward versus I've been in environments where it's like a little bit more top down and you're told what to do, which I guess it's also good in a sense. So it just frees you up to not have to worry about everything. You worry more about like the technical stuff. I sometimes miss that like there's all these other things that I need to do that is not necessarily maybe just machine learning. And I sometimes worry about that it kind of maybe is chipping away at my like skills and like, am I really learning? Like if I'm really trying to be the best machine learning engineer, is this like the best role for me? But it's at the same time, like I'm getting a lot of really interesting, I guess, business level thinking stuff that I might have not necessarily done otherwise.
So that's sort of what you mean by it's still having a startup culture. You wear many hats, there's a lot of freedom, and people tend to delegate to lower levels.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. And there's this interesting dynamic of a lot of people have a lot of ideas. A lot of people at the IC level, it's just generally the thinking is that ideas are a little bit more bottom up. So the ICs tend to come up with the ideas. The ICs tend to build prototypes and kind of try to convince people, and it kind of grows out of that. Now there are obviously like longer term projects that are a little bit more, I guess, centrally or like a little bit more top down. But by and large, and especially in our space, which is kind of a newer space, there's still a lot of those opportunities where you can like kind of start something from scratch and I guess rally people around you to push things forward.
Yeah, it's actually not too dissimilar to how engineering works at Databricks too. I don't think we have quite as much of the bottom up focus at all times because our company is run by engineers. Like our entire executive staff are like world-class software developers. So they have fantastic ideas. They come up with new, like large-scale vision. But once they come up with the concept, they then know what it's like to be an IC or, like a startup type engineer. And they just sort of kick it over the wall, and not really to the wall, but they task somebody, a TL, and they're like, hey, find somebody who you think would be a good fit to design this. Like build a prototype, figure it out, do all the design docs, pitch it to people, get buy-in, get approvals, and then break it and then fix it and, delegate work to junior people. So it's like, even when those ideas come from on high, they try to still have that culture of, hey, ICs, they own this, like really own it. And sometimes you are working with product. If it's like, hey, there's 17 engineering teams that need to do stuff to make this happen, that's what product's for. But if it's just something that a single team owns, yeah, it's try. The idea can come from anywhere, but then people work together. And something that I found that really sets apart companies that are like, Netflix and Databricks in the engineering space is that community, that feel that you get. That it doesn't matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter if for 2 straight sprints, all you're gronking out is a bunch of bash scripts because that's what the project needs. You still feel fulfilled at the end of the day. I mean, maybe you're going a little cross-eyed from just, writing bash. But it doesn't matter what tech you're working on, doesn't matter, what problem, so long as you have your peers that are there, they're like, man, this person's super smart. I'm really glad that I'm getting feedback from them and they want feedback from me. And if I notice that they're going somewhere that might go off the rails, I can give them advice or give them feedback on, their implementation, and they're going to do the same for me. I like what you said about that self-selecting. It's like the hiring process enforces a culture of that activity where people just love working there. Were you prepared for that before you came into Netflix 5 years ago? Did you think it was going to be like that?
I was honestly a little bit worried, especially the perception of the company, especially at that time, was I didn't know exactly what to expect, but reading, I guess there's a bunch of stuff been written about the Netflix culture. A lot of it from the outside, at least I perceived to be negative. So I was worried that what kind of environment am I walking into, especially like a bigger tech company. I still love startups. I still love, at the time, I really loved to be on a more nimble team and like do stuff and be able to actually have some impact. So I had all those ideas in my head, and I didn't know how to reconcile that with what I was hearing or perceiving about the Netflix culture. So I was worried that I'm going to go into a big company and I'm going to be given a tiny project in relative terms, and it's not going to matter at all. And it's if anything, it's been like the opposite. Like the way I describe it to people is that I'm still at a startup. It's just all the anxiety of being at a real startup has gone away. So like all the funding issues, all the worries about like, are we going to survive the next month? That stuff has gone away, but it still feels like I'm like operating at a startup.
And that's interesting that not every single one of the other companies that share that traditional acronym that your company's in, they don't all behave the same way. But I think there needs to be a new acronym that's created. I mean, I'm sure people have, but that culture, I've heard that now from so many people at Netflix, and it's great. And I think it's 100% when you have that startup mentality. That I think it's hard for people that have worked in massive companies, like old school blue chip companies, as a data scientist. Okay.
Hey, have you heard about our book club? I keep hearing from people who have heard about the book club. I'd love to see you there. This month we are talking about Docker Deep Dive. That's the book we're reading. It's by Nigel Poulsen. And we're going to be talking about all things Docker, just how it works, how to set it up on your machine, how to go about taking advantage of all the things it offers, and using it as a dev tool to make sure that what you're running in production mirrors what you're running on your machine. And it's just one of those tools a lot of people use. Really looking forward to diving into it. That's February and March. April and May, we're going to be doing the Pragmatic Programmer. And we're going to be talking about all of the kinds of things that you should be doing in order to further your career according to that book. Now, of course, I have my own methodology for these kinds of things, but we're going to be able to dovetail a lot of them because a lot of the ideas really mesh really nicely. So if you're looking for ways to advance your career, you're looking to learn some skills that are going to get you ahead in your career, then definitely come join the book club. You can sign up at topenddevs.com/book club.
We hired a team of 30 because we make billions of dollars a year. We can hire these people. They're going to innovate. And they find that working in that environment, it requires a year and a half of security review and approval before they can even get a development environment, stood up. So they get nothing done. Their best people leave. The people that are left behind are kind of demoralized. They're not able to grow because they're not in a wholesome environment that fosters creativity among, engineers. But there are places where you have those massive companies that they say, okay, you guys are a skunk works group. Behave like a startup. We'll even give you your own budget and you have full autonomy. And how does it work when you have, or how is it at Netflix, when you have 30 engineering groups that all do the same thing? They're basically like their own little startups.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get things done?
Yeah, there is, I guess, we talked about the positive stuff. So definitely great. Like you get to push things forward. You get to come up with ideas, all of that. Because of, I guess, the lack of or loose coordination between teams, you can get into that situation where, hey, like this other team is doing exactly what we're doing, and we didn't really talk to them, or we didn't even maybe know they existed until like 2 days ago. So there is that problem that you have to be very mindful of. In my experience, you have to kind of figure out like what generally what people are working on, what are they doing, because of the decentralized kind of nature of the company and the culture. That's a real thing. Now there's like mechanisms in place, like forums, and like we're very heavy on writing memos. Like the memos get circulated, all of that, and that's kind of avoids some of this problem. But you still have the kind of the fundamental problem of, am I like working on something that maybe someone else has done? And there's like I guess a graveyard of projects that you can look through, and maybe someone did exactly that 2 years ago that you're just not aware of. The code is sitting somewhere. And like, it's interesting because initially when I started, I think the first 3 months, I was just trying to understand what people have done in my space, in my project. At the time, I was like working with streaming security folks, very different world. And at the time I was trying to understand, like, hey, like, this person has done this part of the project. This other person has done this. They maybe are not working on it anymore. So I was like spending 3 months trying to really understand, put together a picture of what's been done before and what do I need to do that's really an improvement on top of that. And at some point, my manager just said, like, just pretend that nothing exists, and like, let's just move forward, deliver something. And that's a real thing. Now I think over the years, I've gotten a little better at like understanding things when people are working on stuff, like trying to team up earlier, or like, I guess like we really try to encourage people to document when projects are like postmortems and that kind of thing. Because it's really easy. I guess the culture of the company is that you work on something, it doesn't work, like just move on. And that moment where you can capture those learnings and put them somewhere in a way that's consumable for, I guess, for future people, that is like very easy not to do that kind of thing. And there is some, I guess, inefficiency that come as a part of it. So I would say, like, maybe not super negative, but there is definitely, if you're trying to figure out ways that you're really delivering additional value, it becomes a little bit difficult to really navigate all the things that have been done or other teams are doing.
I can imagine another con is this culture requires sort of diversity of thinking and the ability to learn new things. And so you sort of select out super specialized people that only can do this implementation. Has that been your experience, or has everybody been super well-versed and deep as well? Like, is there a difference between generalism and specialism?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Yeah, my experience has been it's a good mix, and the culture is set in such a way that it's more on the generalist side of things than specialist side of things. One example I'll give out is, I guess we do hire research scientists. Maybe I haven't worked at Google or Facebook, but my understanding is there are people who like really purely focus on research. They publish papers. They don't maybe need to worry too much about delivering product impact. We don't really have that kind of role at Netflix. So it's just, there is all this gravitational force to get people to ultimately, whatever they're doing, maybe the best research in the world, start thinking about how that could translate to product impact. People will have to flex into like actually building stuff, into engineering. So I'm seeing that more and more. I guess that's one example of like someone maybe with a very traditional like academic background of like doing really good research, now starting to have to figure out, okay, how do I like set pipelines together? How do I actually put this stuff into production? They may have zero interest in doing that when they started, but like over time, I've been seeing like people are kind of pushed into that direction. I guess another example is just owning a space and being I guess, kind of a product manager for what you're doing. That also pushes people into thinking a little bit more about, what am I doing? How is it impacting this other team? Like, do we really need to do this? What's the ROI? All those questions that maybe, again, like I'll pick on the research scientist, maybe traditionally, like someone from the academic world doesn't have to think about, like, what is the business impact of this thing? You see people I guess, a year or two into the job, starting to pick those up a lot and like really become, at least in my estimation, like a more generalist, at least when it comes to like being a product manager and also being, I guess, an engineer in the case of a research scientist.
So would you say that the community culture within a team breeds that behavior pattern of conformity to generalism? Or is it explicitly told to people, hey, we're going to put you on a training path. You're going to learn, language A, B, and C, and we're going to make sure that we're pairing you for feature development work with this, senior engineer? Or is it more just that person gets in there, they're excited to be a part of the team. They just look around like, man, everybody's so much smarter than I am, but they don't have that hindsight visibility of seeing that everybody on that team went through that process that they're going through right at that moment of panic and like, am I the dumbest person here? Why does everybody know so much more than I do? So do you think it's organic, or is it more, or I should say, what do you think is more effective? The organic situation like that, or the explicit structured form of like making somebody get up to speed to a certain set of skills?
Yeah, in my experience, I'm sure that there are people who've had a different experience, but in my experience, it's not explicit at all. But I guess incentives drive everything. So if you come in and see that all your, I guess, coworkers and teammates are like mentioned in announcements, internal announcements about tools or like productized work or whatnot, I would imagine that starts to like get you thinking about what that means. If all the praise and all the like the accolades are coming as a part of that, if you're mentioned in like big memos coming from leadership, that I think more explains of what people perceive to be incentives of like working at an environment and a culture like Netflix. And I guess the other part, again, kind of focusing on the research part, we're not. There are some teams that are a little bit different, but by and large, our research teams are not like really fundamental research teams, especially if you compare like to a Google or a Facebook, where there are like very big teams that do like fundamental research and can be very much detached from. This is me understanding things from far away. Again, haven't worked at those companies. But since we don't really have that kind of infrastructure for research, there is like, I guess, what I've observed is that there is a lot of push for people to figure out how to actually make impact with whatever they're doing, even if it's like really, I guess, long-term research work. There needs to be some aspect of how is this going to help Netflix in the long run.
Got it. So it sounds like you guys focus on applied methods and it's not just for fun.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And again, I should say there are teams that are doing more like fundamental research. There are teams that are what I'm describing is mostly like what I'm seeing around me, and I guess in the content understanding world. But by and large, I think that is true. Yes.
Got it. And sort of piggybacking off of Ben's earlier question about whether we have to have sort of a track of learning or people just learn automatically via culture. Seems like you take learning pretty seriously. So could you sort of explain your strategy for learning and why it works for you?
Yeah, I think, well, as everyone knows, like the pace of, I guess, the rapid pace of progress in the machine learning world, it's just getting crazy, especially in the past 6 months. I feel like there's no way I can catch up. And I've kind of had this feeling early in my career that I need to have a very systematic, long-term approach to learning. And that mostly came out of understanding that a lot of this, I was talking about like mostly my focus, which is machine learning. A lot of this stuff is like very math-based. You need to take your time to really work through it, understand it. And it's great to like read blog posts. It's great to like try stuff and hack. But there is, I guess, a very different thing about learning math and being systematic about that and learning it over a long period of time. So my strategy there has been to, I guess, again, a portfolio approach of all the blog reading and like hacking and all of that is great. That you learn a lot doing that kind of thing. There was something that was missing in that process, and that was, how do I systematically learn, like, let's say, I don't know, discrete math, or get better at it? Because there's like, I kept hitting walls with trying to read papers, trying to implement stuff. Like, what is this thing? Why is everyone like using this linear algebra thing? How is this like improving things? There's just fundamentally things that I really realize that I don't understand. That's coming. That's really slowing me down in terms of like how quickly I can hack things together. So that's been my approach of, I guess, like I keep using the word portfolio, but doing a little bit of the, I guess, the short term and like the more hacky stuff, and more long term planning out what I want to learn for the next few years. And the best way that I found to do that is to actually take courses that are, the bar is really high. So I'm taking, I guess, a bunch of courses at Stanford. And I found those really to strike a good balance between things that are very much newer and state of the art, and also things that are, I guess, more foundational. That, again, the mathy stuff, what is like convex optimization, what is like systems. Like I'm learning all these like little things that I think have been slowing me down in my career. I think I could, like, there are times where I say, okay, I really don't understand operating systems, and like I keep hitting walls when I'm trying to parallelize work, or there's like this little thing that I don't understand. And then I go like take a like serious operating systems course, or like a parallelization course, and then, well, it's 3 or 6 months of pain. And then I'm like, oh, like this little thing now clicked for me. So now I can, I guess, move forward. And that is, I haven't really found another more quote unquote efficient way of doing that, other than to enduring the pain of doing an actual course for credit, for like turning in all the assignments, doing everything, like the spending 40 hours a week doing some operating systems, I guess, assignment, which is not fun, I guess. Well, depends on your feelings on the subject. But I guess like long way of saying that I think that part I've really found to be useful. It's a little bit frustrating because it doesn't, as I said, I don't know how to do that quickly, and I don't know if there's a way to have those learnings very quickly. And I'm like always thinking, okay, I'm going to be a little bit better in 5 years. Maybe like that's the kind of the time horizon that I'm setting for myself. I don't have expectations that I'm going to be a much better systems engineer in like 2 years, but maybe in 5 years, if I take enough of these courses and like enough of things click for me, maybe I get a little bit better.
So building that sort of ammunition chest of knowledge and skills, what's the end goal out of curiosity? So coming from data science and now ML engineer, and taking classes and understanding how fundamental computer science theory and applications work, and you're at Netflix in an ML engineering role, I think listeners would be very curious. Somebody like you, who's in that position, who still sees, I see the horizon out there of where I want to go 5, 10 years. What would your advice be to people who feel like that's unattainable for them, and why it's so important to continue to look for that horizon?
Yeah, I don't know if I have good advice. I can just say that, at least for me, the end goal is really, I guess, a little bit modest. I'm not thinking I'm going to, like, in 3 years, I'm going to start a company and do X, Y, and Z, and I'm like building towards that. It's, I'm really enjoying, I guess, really getting better at my craft. And the the real, I guess, satisfaction of being able to build cooler things that are more useful, more interesting. And like, I kind of think about it as like architecture, like I'm maybe building houses now. Maybe at some point I can build like skyscrapers, like bigger and better and more interesting stuff. So that's really, I guess, where I am right now with my career. And my thinking, there was a time where I was like thinking very, I guess, deliberately about, I'm going to do these 5 things and I'm going to become a VP at that point, and then I'll start a company and then I'll do this. Right now, that's not where I am, but it's just, I've learned that that's a very, just that internal satisfaction is enough. And that's a good place to be in, because all the external stuff you can't really control. And, yeah, I'm happy to keep that. I'm sure I may do stuff, but that's like not really the main driver right now.
It's just really interesting. I try to ask that question to everybody that I meet who's like kind of at the cutting edge of sort of career growth and performance potential. Everybody says the same thing. I have a very similar outlook as like, it's great to be able to sit back once a year for a half an hour and think about what you did the previous day at work, how long that would have taken you 2 years ago. Or could you have even done that 2 years ago? And stuff that seems almost trivial to you now, it would have been incredibly daunting to try to tackle something like that. And I think that's the most sort of validating, that you're in the right role, you're in the right profession, at the right company for this time in your life, and you're working with the right people, is that you can do that and realize like, yeah, I am growing, I'm getting better, and I can't wait for what's next. And that's a really good analogy, by the way. The little tiny log cabin and then a skyscraper, and then eventually you're going to be building a city.
Yep.
Yep. It's just fascinating to me that so many different people from so many different companies see that question in the exact same way. Not everybody answers it in the exact same way. There are people who are quite obviously miserable, and they have like a really bad answer for that. But everybody who seems like they really love their job and that they're going to continue to be super successful answers it in the same way.
Interesting. I thought I was unique. Apparently not.
No, so sorry.
I mean, you are it's the extreme minority of people that I've asked it to, but all the people that are all, like, this person's going places, they all answer that in the same way.
All right. Well, out of curiosity, then, what's the most recent thing that both of you guys are super proud of that you couldn't have done 2 years ago?
Ooh, interesting question. Yeah, I think it looks very incremental as you're in the middle of it. I think it's just, I like Ben's and like framing of it. I do that like at the end of the year. Usually I look back and kind of take stock of the year and like, what did I do? What kinds of things? I haven't done the exercise of, sometimes I have these moments where I'm like writing a piece of code. Like those are, I guess that's the example that's coming to mind. I'm like, oh, this is like, I remember writing this, or maybe if I'm going back to old code, I'm like, oh, I wrote this 3 years ago, and like, look how dumb this is. Like,
and it got merged into production.
Yes. So I think those are like, I have those little moments from like, oh, this is, now I have a much, I guess, more refined understanding of like what this thing is, what this thing is supposed to do. I don't really think of it as like I guess my own example of like houses to skyscrapers. That kind of is, I guess, coming along for the ride. If I like look at the kinds of projects that I'm doing, they're definitely getting more and more interesting, like more platform level stuff. I'm able to like think a little bit more systematically. I can't really give you no specific example that comes to mind that I guess I can share. But I think that the more interesting thing is those moments, as I said, where I look at something I wrote. Could be code, it could be a memo, it could be just that I remembered how I thought about something like 2 years ago. And especially if I can trace it back to, maybe it took that course, or maybe I really took the time to understand something, and that really changed my perception about the problem. Those are the really satisfying ones to me. Ben, what do you think?
I mean, first, since I work mostly on open source software, I can talk about all the projects I work on. But one of the things earlier this week was I needed to build a prototype, like a demo, to prove out some ideas that we had about like a reverse proxy service. And 3 years ago, if I had, and I thought about it after I got it done, but if this was approached to me 3 years ago, it would have been like, I'm going to need to read like what is that? What is a reverse proxy? How would you do that? How would you set that up to do secure authentication without having credentials provided? So I was sort of thinking after I had built the demo that this would have taken me probably 2 weeks to just be, Googling stuff and reading blogs and looking through, the source code documentation and stuff of different packages that are out there. But earlier in the week, I got the entire end-to-end demo done in about 3 hours because I knew like, okay, I want this to be ASGI compliant. I need, something to execute the server. I need this to be, a very simple CLI to be written around that. I hate args parsing, so I'm using Click in Python. And here's the minimum requirements that I need for this. And I want a simple API interface. So I'm going to create these routes and then create dynamic route parsing. I'm going to provide a YAML config and it'll just parse it. And just building all of that really quickly. And then, writing about 20 tests for it just to prove out that, hey, this actually works. And it's not, just a process running somewhere that can't be terminated and it's not actually serving traffic. That would have taken me weeks. So I had that moment 2 days ago. And I was like, man, I really have gotten better at doing this and knowing like where to go online to find what I need if I need to get that question answered. Like, hey, does this software package support these 4 things? Search within their docs. Yeah, it does. Okay. And not having to sit there and copy example code from somewhere, just understanding that most APIs in a standard language, if they're used by a lot of people, all kind of feel similar because that's how you get a lot of supporters for your open source packages, making it not suck. So you don't really have to spend too much time like really digging through the docs. I do that in implementation, but for like an MVP, like a prototype, it's crazy how fast it becomes over time. And that surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, I think that the interesting part about what you said, or at least the part that really resonated with me that I was thinking about is, especially in software engineering, like over time, you kind of know a lot of the libraries, you kind of have your own way of setting things up that I guess at least I take for granted. Like you have all this accumulated knowledge of like, I this is my starting point. Like if I'm starting a new project, I know what exactly the repo looks like. I know like how to structure things. I know like what are all these different tools. Like I guess argparse versus Click really resonated with me. Like that kind of thing, that little thing. And there's like thousands of those little things that you accumulate into kind of, I guess, like a template for how you're going to do the next thing. And that's really, I guess, that's something I've seen, especially like with a lot of ML people. Like there is a tendency to kind of start from scratch every time. And that like kind of library building, system thinking about like what are some low level components that you can build for yourself and start building stuff on top of that. That I don't see a lot. I'm trying to really do that for myself. And it's like massive productivity boost for me to just have this, I guess, really slowly over time refactor things that I'm doing a couple times, put it in a library, use that library in the next project, keep pushing things down the stack. At some point, like a really interesting pattern that's I'm kind of learning because we're really an applied ML team. and we work with machine learning infrastructure teams. So what I'm seeing is like this kind of constant refactoring of projects. At some point, I can just say, hey, like I've done this thing across 5 projects. Maybe a platform team, can you own this? Or like start thinking about owning this. And that's a really good, I guess, solid way of proposing projects for the infrastructure teams, in our case, like the machine learning platform team, to own, because they can see it. Like it's not an abstract idea. They can see it that it's been used in 5 different projects. May really make sense for them to like provide that abstraction and take it off of our hands. So that like incremental, pushing of things down the stack, and ultimately having like the platform teams own things. That's a really useful pattern that I've learned, and it's really really helping my productivity.
Yeah, it's a super valuable bit of advice for anybody listening and who's wondering about that. I think once you hit a certain number of years of experience as somebody in the ML space, you're going to get to that point where you're like, hey, how many times do I have to do this particular, tabular data? I need to make sure that I don't have autoregressive components across these different features. Like, are they correlated or not? The first 3 or 4 times you build that, you're going to write it from scratch, or you're going to use like, oh, well, Pandas has this thing, and then I can do this in NumPy, and I remember this equation, or I could look it up from this paper, and I'm going to implement it myself. And then after you've done that for 4 or 5 projects, you're like, man, this sucks. I just need to create like a function that does this. And then, starting to piecemeal that together, and you're like, hey, I've got a module here that's, feature pre-processing or validation that uses all these different open source packages. And then you graduate eventually to that point where you're like, hey, I've actually got maybe it's something I put on PyPy, and I can actually install and make a dependency in our individual, use cases. But I really like the way that you talked about how you did that, or how you work on something like that. It's something that I don't hear enough people saying, which is taking software engineering fundamentals about how like a pure software engineer would do that, which is, we'll write something, we'll rewrite it 3 or 4 times before we're saying, okay, this is library code. Like we've got, 95% test coverage on this. We know all the ways that this can break, but the way that you learn all the ways that can break is you broke it, or you created an incident or something before it gets to the point where you're like, this is stable. And I think that's incredibly important, even more so in ML than it is in software engineering in some respects, because the complexity is so much higher. And if it's not written correctly and it's not maintainable and testable, when you try to hand that off to another team to own it, like an infrastructure team, that might be the first thing they ask. Like, how does this work? Where are the tests for this? Wait a minute, you don't have any tests? Oh, you just look at the data coming out of it? Yeah, we can't support that. But if it's properly built out and it's this sort of module, a lot of times they'll look at that and be like, all right, we got it. Thanks for doing this, by the way. You saved us, 3 months of work.
Yeah, it's easy to put machine learning in the bucket of, hey, it's like this stuff is stochastic and it's returns outputs, and I don't know how to test it. And it's like, doesn't really quite fit into like a unit testing framework. And it's a little, I guess it's like an easy way to convince people that's the case and we don't need any tests. But that's, I'm right there with you. It's just, it is really hard, because then like the infrastructure team doesn't know how to support it, especially if you're giving it to someone and they're like, okay, whatever, you say this is ML, I don't need to test it. I'll put it there. The first time it breaks and you're out of the office, like, I don't know what this thing does. I have no way of knowing if this is even the right range of the output that it should be providing.
Yeah, and even not, like indeterminate or non-deterministic tasks outputs from particular implementations, you could still write tests for them. And the only people that are going to write that valid, expected data range that's going to come out of that are the data scientists. You built this model, you're expecting like, hey, if we get a vector that is on the output of this deep learning model and the index count is not what we're expecting, like, hey, we're creating an encoder and we're expecting 304, indices coming out of this vector, just write a test that says, are they floats? Like everything in there should be a float. There should be 304 of them or whatever. And if it's not, then throw and say, hey, somebody changed some code somewhere that now anything that's consuming this is going to absolutely detonate. So that could be, approaches like that. You're not validating determinism, which is what a lot of unit tests are designed to do. But we write on the ML Flow team, like we're constantly writing integration tests and unit tests for ML implementations. And we're not expecting like that packages are going to respect seed values. It's almost impossible to do that. Like what happens when, the compiled C++ libraries that are running in your CI run suite are a slightly different version? Well, your floating point rounding is now just slightly off. So do you do approximate closeness and then that gets kind of messy. Sometimes we do that, but sometimes it's straight up just, is this the correct data structure? And are we not creating like insanity on the outputs?
Yeah, sounds about right to me.
Hey, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk really briefly about the Top End Devs membership and let you know what we've got coming up this month. So in February, we have a whole bunch of workshops that we're providing to members. You can go sign up at topenddevs.com/sign up. If you do, you're going to get access to our book club. We're reading Docker Deep Dive, and we're going to be going into Docker and how to use it and things like that. We also have workshops on the following topics, and I'm just going to dive in and talk about what they are real quick. First, it's how to negotiate a raise. I've talked to a lot of people that they're not necessarily keen on leaving their job, but at the same time, they also want to make more money. And so we're going to talk about the different ways that you can approach talking to your boss or HR or whoever about getting that raise that you want and having it support the lifestyle you want. That one's going to be on February 7th. February 9th, we're going to have a Career Freedom Mastermind. Basically, you show up, you talk about what's holding you back, what you dream about doing in your career, all of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to actually brainstorm together. You and whoever else is there and I, all of us are going to brainstorm on how you can get ahead. The next week on the 14th, we're going to talk about how to grow from junior developer to senior developer, the kinds of things you need to be doing, how to do them, that kind of a thing. On the 16th, we're going to do a Visual Studio or VS Code tips and tricks. On the 21st, we're going to talk about how to build a software course. And on the 23rd, we're going to talk about how to go freelance. And then finally, on February 28th, we're going to talk about how to set up a YouTube channel. So those are the meetups that we're going to have along with the book club. And I hope to see you there. That's going to be at topenddevs.com/sign up.
Cool. So we're about at time, so I will wrap. We talked about a lot of really, really cool things, and I have a fat set of notes that I will try to condense right now. So a couple miscellaneous things. Data lifecycle management can be really tough. At Netflix, they probably have a good implementation for it, but thinking about how data evolve, it's just a challenge. And then also when you're working with people, and specifically building tools for stakeholders, people like it when you automate the boring stuff. And if they have sort of a growth mindset and are ready to pivot, they will realize that it won't take their job. So some important pieces of culture. We use Netflix as a case study, but you can apply this to virtually any company. It's important to have ICs that can think critically and care about the product. They really care about the value that it provides. Freedom and delegation and sort of wearing a lot of hats, these startup concepts typically work well for fast-paced environments. And then there's this sort of feeling of community that is typically seen in a lot of the top engineering firms. But there are some negatives, as with any strategy. Decentralization means you need to communicate a lot, and there can be duplication of work, and sometimes you aren't as efficient as possible. It's sort of like democracy versus authoritarian regimes. And then Amir is big on learning. So his value or his strategy, and sort of the value prop behind learning is you need to build stuff, right? You need to be successful. You need to know things. And how you can do that, what works for him is being really systematic, taking classes, adding structure to his learning. And the way that he chooses these classic is sort of letting his implementations drive what he learns and what he works on. But also curiosity is very important. Then finally, over time, you sort of build up this tech stack and set of tooling that can really improve your efficiency and help you do something out of the gate very effectively. So Amir, if people want to learn more about you and your projects, where should they go?
Well, first of all, I want to say that summary was amazing. I did that on the fly. That's great. I wish I was that coherent. Yeah, people want to find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I guess I'm no longer active on Twitter. So LinkedIn works. You can find me on LinkedIn. And also a plug for the Netflix blog series. It's been a few blog posts recently that we've written about the content understanding in the media machine learning space at Netflix. If you're interested in that, definitely take a read. I think there's a series, and now we've had like 7 posts covering some of the areas that I kind of touched on. Yeah, that would be where people can find me and my plug.
Cool. And also on Medium, check out Consisting Hashing from First Principles Part 1.
Yes.
It's a joy. It's actually really, really cool. So if you guys have time, check it out.
Yes, there is also my personal blog.
Right. Cool. Well, until next time, it's been Michael Burke and my co-host,
Ben Wilson.
And have a good day, everyone.
Take it easy.